All right. Well, happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to another weekly update where we are living at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience with the stated goal of keeping you 10 steps ahead. I'm looking forward to today's real quick plug for those of you who watch, listen, however you're consuming this. If you do find it valuable, share it with someone. And also, if you could go out, give it a like, give it a review, whatever you're consuming it on, just helps other people find it. So thank you for that. I've got a few topics outlined. One is actually a response to a previous topic, and then a couple other ones that I want to dig into. So I'm just going to jump straight into it. So the first one has to do with, this wasn't last week, but the week before, I talked about my very heightened concerns about OpenAI's announcement to get into, at least explore the adult entertainment space and the use of their technology for that. And let me tell you, I was really surprised, not surprised by the response, but I've stepped on landmines over many times in my career, and you often don't realize you're about to step on a landmine till after it blows your leg off. And there was quite a response to my take on this. And again, usually I don't respond to responses to things because I don't necessarily always know it's helpful, and there's just lots of stuff out there. But there were just some things that came up that I thought, you know what, this is a big enough deal that I actually do want to respond to what came out of this and how people reacted to it. So my response is really broken down into three parts. So hear me out on this. The first part is, well, I'll just go through them. So there's three parts to it. The first one was the response that I received because in it, I articulated that I'm coming from a biblical worldview, and I am a Christian, but that wasn't really, if you listen back to it, that was not the point of me bringing this up, but just more so saying I'm not blind to the fact that influences the way that I look at it. However, there are lots of other factors that are coming into play with this. And I was actually really surprised, both publicly in some of the comments, but also the private messages I got by people that were very scathing, actually, to be honest with you. Now, I'm surprised and not surprised by this. I actually had the opportunity to follow up with some people, and actually some of them meet live and just talk with them. And again, I was surprised, but not surprised. Honestly, I want to acknowledge the fact that I know that when people hear someone's a Christian or they're coming from a biblical worldview, that can sometimes incite a certain feeling in people. And a lot of times that feeling comes from a lot of hurt that has been inflicted on people by people carrying the banner of Christianity. And so I just want to say, when you hear me say that, you have a reaction to it, I'm sorry that that's been your experience, because it shouldn't be that way. And I know it happens. And I don't think it does anybody any good when we pretend that doesn't happen or we dismiss it. I know there has been a lot of legitimate hurt that has come at the hands of people who have said, well, I'm doing this because it's what the Bible says, or this is what God would want. And it's not an accurate statement. I think my response to that is, if you've met a Christian or anything, you've met that Christian. And so hopefully those of you who watch and listen to my content know that, hey, I'm just as unique and dynamic as anybody else. And honestly, some of the things people sent, it was very clear that they were taking their experience or their assumptions about what they thought or what they'd experienced, and they were making about me holistically as a person because of that. And there were a lot of things that people actually sent me that I actually don't even agree with this. Like, you're arguing against me, and I actually am aligned to what you're arguing against, which was really interesting, which was why I actually followed up with some of these folks and said, can we talk? Can we actually have a conversation? Because I think there's things you're assuming about me. You're reacting to some of my stuff, and I'd rather just sit down with you and have a better understanding of things. And let me just say, that lesson, that reminder, and the reason I decided, one of the big reasons I wanted to respond to this was, one, to give additional clarity to my original points, but also as an encouragement to people that this is really, I experienced in the last 2 weeks, and have many times, but this one in particular was like, wow, I really stepped on this thing. This is a huge danger of assuming you know things about someone simply because of their religious background or their political affiliation or their ethnic background, any of these things. And honestly, if you've listened to my content, you know I really try and raise awareness about the risks of doing this. And it's why I talk so much about getting to know people on an individual level. And don't just assume you know something because you think something and you straw man that and all of that. And I would use this as an encouragement to folks because some of the conversations, both, asynchronous via chat messages and things like that, and some of the live conversations I had, I genuinely enjoyed the conversation. And I can tell you right now, we didn't end the conversation where we all went, oh, great. And now we agree with everything. But we were able to understand each other better. And there was an opportunity to get to know each other. And so I would actually encourage people, if you have folks that you interact with or things that you're assuming about them, take the time to get to know them and actually understand them on a deeper level, because there are probably a lot of assumptions you're making about people that are likely not accurate. The other thing I will also say, because anybody who listens to my stuff knows that I will reference, occasionally here and there, how my worldview is playing into things. And let me just say, again, some of the assumptions that were made was, oh, well, you're just saying this because of that. And I will be the first to say I'm often extremely skeptical of biblical defenses to things. When somebody just tells me, well, this is what you have to do because the Bible says, or whatever, I'm just as skeptical as probably some of the skeptics out there who are hesitant. And hopefully that comes through in some of the content that I create, because I have seen over the years, going back to my earlier point, I have seen the Bible, I've seen Christian values used as a weapon. And it breaks my heart when that happens. And I hate that that happens. And it's actually happened to me on many occasions, which is part of the reason I'm so skeptical about it and why I tend to dig into the text itself or try and understand what's really going on and actually look at natural law as well. And that was the case I was trying to make, which is why it was such a surprise when people had such a visceral reaction to that. And I think it speaks to some of the harm that has been done by people proclaiming to be Christians over the years and misusing scripture to justify horrific things. And so I just wanted to address that. If you ever want to know more or reach out, I am always happy to engage with people. And my goal is not to try and argue and convince you that you need to see the world the same way I do. I love learning from other people and understanding where they're coming from and why they're where they are. And so I've got a pretty crazy story myself. So it's not released yet, but I'm on a podcast called Standing Stones, where I do go into it a little bit deeper than I think I ever have on any of mine. So that's not released yet. But if you're actually curious, either one, just reach out and you can chat with me or watch for that. Shifting gears, though, off of that topic and focusing on really my response to some of the criticism around adult media. While I acknowledge that my biblical worldview obviously is what is ultimately rooted where I'm like, well, this is ultimately why I think we're seeing this play out this way and why we're seeing the destruction. Let me just tell you right now, I have lots of friends that do not adhere to my worldview, and there is countless amounts of secular data coming out that adult media is not a net positive for society. And there are people who you would not expect at all to be opposed to this, who are standing up going, this is a huge risk. So I'm not talking just about the AI piece. I'm talking about just adult media in general. So this is not, well, Christians don't like it and they're trying to ruin non-Christian fun. The data and the experiences are out there. This is serious. And so, I actually have not encountered, and feel free if you come across any, share it with me. I have not encountered any research or data that says this is a net positive. This is a benefit to people. So, based on some of the responses, some of the reactions that I got, some of the messages that I received saying, no, this is, again, a lot of the reactions I got had actually nothing to do with my point on the AI piece. They were all in defense of adult media. And let me just say, if you're in that camp of thinking it's neutral or a net positive, you don't have to believe me because of the worldview I hold to. Honestly, I would encourage people to go look this up and check it out. And quite frankly, like one of the things was, well, people are going to just do worse things if they don't have this. And that's not a compelling argument because the data doesn't support it. And the data is continuing to show that it's reinforcing and growing the very behaviors that lead to much more destructive things. So again, I'm always open to hearing other sides of this. I'm always open to looking at research that's coming from this, but anecdotal data or things that just say, well, I don't think it's that big of a deal, or I see this other trend, or I'm fine with it, I'm not affected by it. It's not in line with where the data is landing. And that's not just people who share my worldview. So if you're there, I really was surprised by how many people came to its defense. And I think it's largely because of what we see with how pervasive it is. And so, of course, something that people are very accustomed to, and it's very much integrated into their life, even if they don't necessarily like that it's there, the thought of it being taken away seems to stir a very uncomfortable reaction in folks. I was actually really also surprised by how many people defended it based on, well, we need a sexual outlet for things. And so this is a way to do that. And I just want to say my take on this is, no, you don't. You can live a happy and fruitful life without sexual activity. And I think when we start placing something that maybe we enjoy, or something that is good, or that, whatever, when we start placing that on the same level as food, shelter, oxygen, this is actually one of the things that I believe can lead to us getting our priorities out of order. If you think a sexual outlet is a need, then suddenly the belief that, well, so adult media is required because there's a need that has to be met, and some people can't get this met through other channels, so they have to do it. And honestly, I think this is a large part of why we see such addiction and dependency on it, is because we are starting from this pervasive foundation that, well, we have to have this, we can't get it this way, so then this seems to be the only logical alternative to it. And then ultimately we begin fueling our reasons for keeping something that's so destructive and addictive because of where we started. And just as an example of this, if someone is addicted to drugs, we see an exponential rise in drug abuse. We don't fight against that by saying, well, people are so used to it, they're addicted to it, we just need to find harder and harder drugs to give these people. We can't pull them out. We actually try and get them less dependent on it. And that's the way we battle back with this. So I would highly encourage folks, many people who reached out to defend it, to say, I don't think this is that big of a deal. Do the research yourself and don't take my word. Honestly, I would encourage you to also look for research in a way that is not biased. Make sure that when you're looking for things, just look like, what are the effects of this on people? Don't say, is it harmful or is it beneficial? You're already biasing the results that you're going to get. And you can start to drill into this on a deeper level and say, I just want to see, what are the effects of this physiologically, psychologically, sociologically? Keep it neutral. You won't have to look very far to see that the data conclusively is showing we are dealing with something that is not in our best interest, despite the fact that for a moment it may seem like, well, that was kind of nice. And, the other thing that I saw a lot of in some of the responses was, well, I personally have not experienced harm, so I don't think it's that big of a deal. But when you see data that's saying 9 in 10 men are struggling with this or actively engaging, 6 in 10 women regularly engage in adult media, it's not surprising, that we would come to the defense of it. And that we would try and protect something regardless of what the data tells us about. And the thing is, because of how pervasive it is, we've got loads of data that validate, how harmful this can be. I think the other thing, though, is we really got to be careful. So if you listen to my last one or you listen to this one and you feel that side of you getting defensive and getting frustrated, so much so that you want to send me a scathing email or a DM, I would just say, be really careful, because we are often terrible judges of what's good or bad for us. I'm keenly aware of the things that over the years and growing up, maturing, things that I would just go, well, I don't think it's that bad. I would be totally fine with this. And I think about having 7 kids. I mean, if I let them eat what they wanted because they thought it was fine, they'd eat nothing but junk food. And they'd go, well, see, Dad, I didn't die of a heart attack, or I'm not, struggling with this. Yet I would know that the data is not in their favor for them to eat junk food. And I think this is where we got to be really careful when we justify things by saying, well, I personally don't think it's harmful. I've evaluated the impact on myself and I don't see it as being concerning, because a lot of times our impact assessment, one, it's very short term. We're looking at things where I don't know anybody who listens to this that you can message me if you want, if you actually have this, but I don't know a single person I've ever encountered in my life that they can't think of something where they look back and they go, you know what, if I knew what I know now, I would not have done that. And I wouldn't have gone down that path. And it just goes back to show us that we aren't always the best judges of what's good or bad for us. And our individual experiences don't paint a complete picture. I think about a lot of different things, that we just don't see in ourselves. And another piece that just came to mind as I saw some of these defenses, and as I had really serious conversations with people after the fact, was often seeing that you have an addiction is one of the hardest things to see in yourself. And I've grown up around addiction. I've had lots of people in my life who have wrestled with addiction. Nobody wants to think of themselves as being addicted to something. And so I get it. I understand why it's hard to say, this thing has got a hold on me that I really wish we didn't have. Because if you do that, that first step can be extremely overwhelming. So I'm sensitive to the fact, I understand where some of this defensiveness is coming from, but we also got to think it's not just about you and how it's affecting you and maybe your inner circle, but the output as a whole on society and what it does. Some of the defenses that came through were, well, it's just media of two consenting adults, and AI just makes it better because now that you don't even have to deal with the consenting adults. And this is just not the case in a lot of situations. There is a ton of stuff out there that is not consenting adults. That's just not what it is. And also, as we start digging into, what do we mean when we say consent? Because is it really consent if you have no other options, or you get into something and you just feel like you can't get out, or you still, like, at what point is your consent pulled back? So I think we just need to be really, really careful with this topic. And I understand where the defensiveness comes from. I did not expect the kind of response that I did or that I received. And so again, I won't not lean into things simply because people are uncomfortable with it, or, it feels a little messy. I think if anything, that's usually a good sign. I've found in my life, the things that I get really defensive about are probably the things I need to do a little self-examination on and go, why am I getting so hot-headed over this? My last piece on this, and then I'll transition to topic number 2, is the AI specifically. Because again, like I mentioned before, the vast majority of responses I got actually had nothing to do with AI in adult entertainment. Most of it was people jumping to the defense of adult media as it's totally fine, it's harmless, like you just this, or it was these overpowered, well, you're just this way, so you want a tyrannical reign and all this. It wasn't related to any of these things. So I actually want to revisit the adult entertainment, AI in adult entertainment piece, because my point with this was, one clarification that people reacted to when they heard this was, they reacted as they thought what I was saying was I was calling for a straight up full prohibition on adult media. And I think that's where some of the visceral reaction came from, was people were like, I have this thing. You're saying you want to take it away from me. Now, I don't know where that came from. I'm not sure why people interpreted that out of what I said. And I listened back to my response a couple times to see, hey, is there anything I said in here that I can kind of correct or go back on? I will be the first to say, yes, I firmly do believe, and I think the data supports it, that we as a society would be far better off with no adult media. And I don't, again, show me the data otherwise. So yes, do I think we would be better off without it? Now, there's a difference between I think we would be better off without it and my solution to this problem and concern about AI or adult media in general is, well, let's just put a whole on prohibition on that. And this was one of the people I ended up meeting with was asking me, well, so isn't your solution to just cancel all of this? And I said, look, like, I don't think that's a reasonable or even realistic solution. Even though I think that would be ideal, would I love it if we got to that place? I don't think the solution is we try and ban this stuff. So to anybody who listens to this and thinks, well, Christopher's solution to where things are going with AI and adult media in general is let's just ban it from everybody. Compliance doesn't work. I've been around the learning space. I've been around human behavior way too long to know you don't just mandate things and expect people to do it. So to the people who thought I'm taking a tyrannical approach or I want to take away your fun, like, that's not how I operate. So let me be clear on that. I'm not going to get into my full-blown perspective on what I think the right solution to this is, but I can tell you right now, the solution to it is creating awareness to how destructive this is and hopefully reducing the demand for it in people, where people see it for what it is and go, I don't want this presence in my life anymore. I think that's where I would like to get us to, not let's rip it out of people's death grip hands because, and then we'll just force it through. It doesn't work. And then my goal is never to force my worldview on others, regardless of what it is. So I just wanted to clarify that point. My bottom line on this is really 2 points. First, based on all the data, there is not a lack of adult media in the world. So as we're talking about AI and adult media, there's not a lack of this stuff out there. It's not like anybody's going, I really wish I had more access to this, or I can't find the kind of media that I want. And so even if you believe it's harmless or you think it's a net positive, I firmly will stand on the state that there's not a case to exponentially expand its reach with AI. And that's exactly what AI is designed to do. It's designed to take something and accelerate or exacerbate it like through the roof. So my case against AI in adult media is to say, hey, this thing already is prevalent. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. People are already struggling with it. We got data proving this is not helping. Let's not strap a tank of nitrous oxide to it and send it into the stratosphere. We don't need to make this worse through additional personalization and accessibility. It's just not necessary. Second, based on how AI works, the other point that I want to make on the AI piece is it can be perceived that AI will make adult media less harmful than it is because, well, AI is doing it now. It's not people. And that's just not the way AI works. The way the industry works, the practices of the industry, we are not going to reduce the harm or reduce the people involved in this by simply saying, hey, let's use AI. It's a safer way to go about this. And if you want to go and listen back to why I make that case, that's really the whole point of me having that topic, was to focus on that and say, look, I'm not a fan of the stuff and I think we'd be better off without it. Let's certainly not take something that's overly pervasive, has an industry that's built on destructive practices, and make it bigger. That's just not where we need to be going. And that really was the clarification point that I wanted to make. So I think I've said enough on this. We'll see what other emails and messages I get as a result. I'm probably not going to make a third response to it. As things evolve, it obviously will be something I will continue touching on as things move. So with that, let's shift gears over to another one, which was OpenAI is in the news big time this week and the last week and a half. They have been recently for a number of reasons. But the big story is 2 of their execs left in a very, very public fashion and had some, they were diplomatic in what they said, but I mean, it was pretty clear they were not happy with OpenAI and what it was doing and where it was going. And so they left. And I think as I think about this thing, there's a lot to consider with this, because as I see some of the stuff out there in the news about it, I understand where people's concerns are. It sounds on the surface very concerning. 2 of the senior most execs in the company, who, by the way, were responsible, 2 of the execs who are responsible for overseeing safety and long-term implications of where OpenAI was going. I mean, basically, these gentlemen were in charge of protecting people from where this was going. They leave, and they leave in a public fashion. And a lot of what they said is our safety concerns just reached a point where we could not meet at all. We just have to go because it's just going too far. That sounds really, really bad. And I've got some very legitimate concerns. And stacked on top of that, you also got to keep in mind that, these folks at senior levels, they're walking away from a lot of money. And so to go out on their own and say, we're going to not only just leave and leave quietly, we're going to leave publicly, raising concerns about this stuff. I can completely see where a lot of people are picking up on this and going, this is terrible. This is doomsday. This is all of this. I will talk about my legitimate concerns with this, but I think we've got to be careful about how we respond to this and about how we just can quickly make assumptions. I've talked a lot about assumptions we can make when we hear things. To be clear, I will go into my concerns because I think there are some serious concerns with this. But I also want to represent the HR perspective and how some of this stuff can go down and how it's often far more complicated than meets the eye with some of these things. So first of all, both of these folks, they're going to be just fine. So some of the stuff that people use to validate that this is even more serious because they're walking away from all this money, they're doing all this. If you heard Sam Altman comment on some of their basically clawback policies, which is, we take back your stock, we do all this other stuff, our non-compete disclosures, all these other things. You can kind of go, whoa, look at all these, tyrannical type policies and all these things that are happening. You also got to keep in mind that this company exploded in growth that they had no idea it was going to grow this big. And so if you've ever worked in a company that grows super fast, especially HR policy type stuff, hiring practices, clawbacks, retentions, non-competes, a lot of these things just get randomly kind of like thrown together because you need to do it. And you also don't know enough about where you're going to know how to do it well. So I would be careful if when you hear this stuff, you allow that stuff to overfuel your concerns about the safety things and about them leaving. Okay, don't let it exacerbate things. Not that there's not risks and not concerns. It's not that they're not walking away. These folks will be just fine. And I will actually be curious to watch if they end up doing what some of the other big AI folks have done, where they have this huge presence, all this stuff. Then they go off saying, look how terrible it is. And now they go make a boatload of money independently, talking about all the fears and concerns and how it's going to be the end of the world based on the very stuff they were involved in creating. So just again, slow down before you react to some of this stuff. I just know too much about how HR stuff works. And I don't know if it's one of these, because some of what you'll hear is OpenAI dissolved the safety team and then they left. So did they get fired? Did they get kicked out? And you can start to draw your own conclusions on this. And sometimes it's like, well, maybe they just weren't getting what they wanted and they left. And of course, you have two of your senior most people in charge of something. Every company reevaluates the org design and org structure when that happens. Not saying that's what happens, not saying there's nothing to be concerned about, but a lot of the news hype that I've seen about this, I think, is pouring fuel on a fire that really doesn't need to be on a fire. There's plenty to be concerned about as it is. We don't need to add more fuel to it because we go, ooh, they had non-competes. They took back their stocks. They, were so altruistic and went out on their own, to tell the truth about what's going on in big tech. Maybe big egos at senior levels, you're not getting what you want. It's not going quite the way you want. And you decide, hey, it's a heck of a lot easier to make a big stink about this. And no person who ever leaves a company goes back and goes, this was my fault, or this is the role I played in this type of a thing. You're only going to hear from those folks why they're really the hero in this. And like I said, I have legitimate concerns, but if you're reading and following this stuff, kind of panicking, I would drill that back a bit. Take it with a grain of salt. Even if it's legitimate stuff, there's probably a lot more to the story. Now, that said, I am concerned and have been concerned long before these two execs left about these big AI companies and their focus and attention on long-term implications and safety. And this isn't new to OpenAI. This isn't new to big tech companies. So I think this is where we also got to be careful that we don't demonize OpenAI with what they're doing. This is a problem in the industry as a whole, because I understand from a business standpoint that investing in the ethics and the long-term research and actually digging into this stuff, it's expensive. It takes time. You're committing resources to all of this. I can tell you right now, OpenAI is feeling the pinch from investors and people in general going, okay, what are you going to do next? How are you going to make more money? That's exactly why I think they're starting to explore adult media. It's an easy win for them to cash in on some more funds. So I think what we're seeing is these companies are starting to make, and this happens a lot with companies. A lot of companies, they get big, they need more money, and suddenly money becomes more important than, well, is what we're really doing in the best interest of things. And I think we're starting to see that with big tech, is that, hey, they just want to make as much money as they possibly can. And those kind of pesky research teams and safety teams that are going, hey, have you considered this? We're really worried about this, and maybe we should slow down over here. That's getting in the way of profits. It's getting in the way of progress. And we've got other big companies now that are competing against us. And so we got to just set these things aside, because ultimately we just got to make it, because if we don't do it, somebody else will. And so this kind of thinking, I'm already starting to see creeping in. It has been for some time, and it's not a new story. Now, you might hear all that and go, well, that's not terribly encouraging. So are you saying we're screwed? Yes and no. In the sense of some of this destructive stuff that's going to happen, the overall societal impact, the way this is going to affect people as a whole. I was talking with somebody yesterday about how I am seriously concerned about the psychological well-being of people as they start developing unhealthy relationships with their AI bots. And what does it mean for them and the way they interact and relate to other people and how they spend their time and all these other things. In some ways, I think on a macro scale, we're in for some really tough roads ahead, and we may see some of those impacts in the near term. We may not see some for a very long time. So there's that. But then you might listen and go, so what do I do about it? What can I do? And I really want to take, especially with these updates, to make sure at the end of each one of these, I have kind of a point of here's how you can respond to this regardless of where you are. I think one of the biggest things is you need to take responsibility for yourself and your discernment and the decisions you make about the use of AI in your life. You cannot wait for OpenAI or Google or Anthropic to come up with regulatory policies for how their AI can be used and where they'll use it and what kind of data practices they're going to have. If you're trusting that they will take care of that for you, you're not skating on thin ice, you're skating on no ice. You will get curb stomped by this stuff. And so what you can do is actually start all these things I talk about. You need to be thinking about them. You need to be thinking about the role AI plays in your well-being and where is it affecting you in a positive way? Where is it actually making you a worse person? Where is it actually dragging you down? And like I said, going back to my previous point on the adult content piece, we are often terrible judges of this in ourselves. So if you're trying to do this alone, you are going to miss things and you are going to get taken for a ride. And so I would encourage people to, if you don't have people who know you well, a close group of friends who can speak into your life in a way that you maybe don't want to hear. Maybe a podcast from me pisses you off, but maybe you have a friend who can say the same thing to you and you'll actually step back and go, okay, maybe I do need to take this a little seriously. If you don't have those people in your life, you need to get them. And then you need to be thinking about really diligently, where is AI coming in? How is it being used? How will I be doing this? Because I can tell you right now, big companies are not going to slow down, because even if they know, we saw this in tobacco, we've seen this in chemical, we've seen this in all sorts of industries where once companies get rolling on some of this stuff, they're going to do what they need to do to make as much money as humanly possible. And oftentimes at the expense of everyone else. And so don't count on these companies to take your well-being and your health and your long-term success into consideration, because chances are they might, but not as much or not as well as you will. So that's my response to that one. It'll be interesting to see what happens with this. I think some of the blowback, Sam got caught off guard by how much blowback they got, because I do think people are really starting to understand how serious this really is and how they are going to hold these companies to higher standards, which I think is a good thing. It's also part of why I do so much to try and help people understand this so that you can do what you can, and not only in your individual life, but in whatever channels of influence you have. All right. So that's where I land on that one. The other big news thing that actually kind of ties to this is, so OpenAI inked a deal with Reddit, which I thought was a really not surprising, but interesting move that, again, was mixed with a lot of mixed reviews. I understand what they're trying to do with it. If you're not familiar with Reddit, it's kind of one of these sub threads where you can go, have discussions anonymously with people about certain topics, things that, maybe you wouldn't feel comfortable talking about, with your neighbors. At least that's kind of the reputation it gets. It's a lot of unfiltered discussion about stuff, which, when you think about, if people are going, why would OpenAI, if you listen to me, you probably have an idea, but if you're newer to it, you might be going, why would OpenAI ink a deal with Reddit? Well, it's content. It's data about what people really care about, how people respond to things. How do people really respond to things? Not the polished public political response. How do they talk when they think nobody's watching? It's a data source for it. And I can understand why they would want that. Usually you can find extremely, current and relevant topics on Reddit. You can find the latest details out. You can find a lot of times information that you won't find in the mainstream, because you will hear from voices that maybe wouldn't be comfortable doing a podcast about what's going on, but they will write on a Reddit thread where nobody can really know. Now, that actually leads to my mixed feelings on this. I think on the positive side, is it going to help enhance these AI models with non-AI generated content? At least for the time being, yes, which I think is good, because if you think about it, a lot of the media and data that's being fed into these is actually AI generated. So AI's eating its own tail. It's learning from itself, which isn't super helpful. So it's another source of kind of what's really going on. What do people really think about things? And I think in some ways that raw, unfiltered conversation can help AI have a better, more broad spectrum than the usual typical generic stuff you will get from AI. So I think it has the potential to be a good thing. I think the other thing that a lot of times can be really positive about these kinds of data sources is they represent underrepresented voices. Again, when you feel you have some anonymity, you're kind of in a place that's known for speaking candidly and talking, it can bring out people who maybe wouldn't speak up. And I think that has the potential to be a good thing. That said, where I'm concerned about it is, and we may never know, is how will the AI models, how will OpenAI weight the data that it's getting out of Reddit? How does it weigh it in terms of its credibility? So if all the data in the world is saying this, but a Reddit thread says this, how will it factor that into the way it determines how it should consider that as it's coming up with its responses, or it's creating its own opinions on things along the way? And the reality that we all know, and it's only going to get worse, is just because something's on the internet doesn't mean it's real or legit. There's lots of stuff I've seen on Reddit where I go, that's not even real. Like, that has been proven conclusively false. And again, because of the anonymity, I can say I'm a secret advisor to Sam Altman and I've been involved in blah, blah, blah meetings and I've seen all this stuff. Can't validate it. I can just say I can't share because it's not safe for me to say. So we got to be really careful about this. And that's where I do get a little nervous, because it can be good that it's unfiltered. Unfiltered also means that it doesn't have any sort of checks and balances on its credibility, its reliability. And, I'd encourage people to remember back to the Twitter bot. It didn't take long for that thing to go off the chain when it started just learning and responding based on people's raw, unfiltered responses to things, which, Reddit's not quite what happened with the Twitter bot, but it has the potential to be there. I think the other risk that I have on this is the privacy concerns around it. So Reddit's inking a deal with them or with OpenAI. And, a lot of people we don't think about how what we share, especially on the internet, might be used in the future. So let's say something happens and you've got a hot take on whatever, and you go out and you post a Reddit rant about someone or something or whatever. Will you feel the same way the next day when you wake up after a good night's sleep? And if that information were to be suddenly associated and attributed to you, or that information was used to make a decision about something else, would you feel comfortable with that? Or would you not? And are you actually consenting to everything you've ever said on Reddit being now fed into this? And this gets into some of the privacy stuff that a lot of people are experiencing, whether it's music, whether it's media, whether it's all these things. But when you post stuff on the public domain, it's fair game. And so I don't know the terms of OpenAI's deal with Reddit. Will it be retroactive? Like by them inking this deal, will they have access to everything everybody has ever posted on Reddit? I don't know. But I think that's something that, as a user, if you're a user or a contributor to things like Reddit or anything for that matter, be extremely mindful. So going to the what can you do about it? Man, be mindful what you post on the internet and what you put out there, because nothing is private. And even the things you may think are private, they might be private now. They might be private when you do it, but they might not stay private forever. And that's where kind of the whole Reddit situation, I'm like, well, what happens if somebody wrote something that, who remembers the post that you put on the internet 6 months ago even? Are you going to go back and be like, wait, let me delete my comment here because I don't really want this being fed into the AI because that's not really what I think. And I wouldn't want something taking my opinion that day when I had a really bad day and now amplifying it with AI, because that's what AI is going to do. It's going to amplify everything it finds. And so I would just encourage everyone listening and watching as an individual user, be really careful what you put out there on the internet, because you don't know where and when and how it will be used in the future. So again, just more discipline to what we do and how we think and how we, represent ourselves out there. All right, last and final one, and these will probably start to get shorter after this week since I won't have kind of long topics built in. But who knows? I say that and then I get going, and we'll see where timing is of the essence. So I'm revisiting a topic that I've had a couple things on in the past, which was, there was this whole boom that like DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion is dead. It's a complete reversal of where we are as society and we're going backwards and all this stuff. There's a lot of hype around it. And I've talked about, I think there's more to the story that's going on here. And well, wouldn't you know, the death of DEI, and it's not dead. It's just been resurrected in a new form, and it's all over the place. It was on Inc. It was on LinkedIn, all over I saw a number of articles that, DEI is gone. Here, you ready for it? Drum roll. The new thing is inclusion. So we've kept the I from DEI, and it was DEIB, and then it was something else. It's been a number of flavors, but now it's the I. It's all about inclusion. So it's not gone. It's not, maybe we'll have chief inclusion officers now. I have no idea where this one will go, but I predicted it. It's going to come back in a new flavor. And my take on this whole approach to focus more on inclusion than kind of the whole gamut of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and how all those things fit together, I don't know that it's really all that different. I think in some ways, we over-indexed when the DEI or diversity and inclusion, it was DI, I think at first, then it was equity and inclusion. Anyway, I don't know why I'm rambling about that. But when that started going up, I think we over-indexed as a whole. We made this huge shift from kind of, it started in a good way. We're like, hey, let's create additional awareness about this. Let's change some things. We recognize there's opportunity. There's some systemic things built into our systems. Like, how do we address those? How does all of that? And then it just started gaining momentum like so many things do. It got teeth and hair and fangs and claws, and it just went kind of bonkers. We went from what wasn't healthy, which was white's the best. And then it was like, white's the worst. If you're white, you're terrible. And and it was like being a guy's the best. And then it was being a guy is terrible and men are horrible. And so we have this bad habit of swinging, and the data is clear. This out of control freight train that was what many considered the DEI movement wasn't working. And I think initially it had some good things. There are some things it accomplished for its time, but as it started steamrolling out of control, like many things, all of a sudden the counterbalance started swinging to counter it, and it caused a lot of tension. And I'm not going to repeat everything that I've said in the past about how some of this stuff just didn't work. There was a lot of political kind of peacocking around what organizations were doing. It was trendy to be on the DEI train. It was all this other stuff. And it kind of lost its really intended purpose, which was, hey, how do we make work a better place for everybody, not just a certain group or class? And what happened was, as it moved out of control, we just shifted the power from one group to another group. And it just ended up causing a lot of the same problems. Now, so does moving to inclusion, can it be a good thing that we're kind of saying, hey, let's recognize this freight train was out of control. Let's try and get it back on the tracks. I think that can be a good thing. So I'm happy to see we're acknowledging, what was working isn't really working, and it's not dead. I am very glad to say I'm happy to hear it's not dead, and we're saying, no, it's still going to be a focus. It's just going to come out like a phoenix, slightly different. The bad, though, and the part that I'm concerned about when we just say, DEI is dead and now we're on to inclusion, is it can almost be an overreaction from the original power group that comes from this place of, we felt like we were losing a little too much ground. And so now we're going to try and slow the train down by going, yeah, that was really great. Now let's make it for everybody. Isn't that a really good thing? Which we saw with the Black Lives Matter movement, where that started originally to draw greater attention to a really important thing. And then it really snowballed. And then the response to kind of battle it back was, well, shouldn't we care about all lives? And then it kind of lost any sort of effect, because it was like, well, I guess nobody was really arguing about that in the first place when you neutralize it down to all lives matter. So it loses its momentum. And I think that's the risk I think we can have with this inclusion, is we go, yeah, that what DEI was originally trying to do was a good thing, but then it got bad. So let's just make it for everybody. And by making it for everybody, it really doesn't positively affect anybody anymore. The reality is scales aren't equal. And we run the risk of just over indexing on this inclusion, and inclusion turns into, how do we make everybody the same, which takes us right back to where we were in the first part, which is, well, if you aren't the same, your experience is wildly different and it's not as great. And it's just the preferences of the majority group that dominate this thing. And I think we see some of this stuff happening in the remote, in-office shift that, is like, yeah, we want to be inclusive and allow people to do this and let them work where they want to work and where they can be successful, to actually where you want to make it inclusive and collaborative. And inclusive and collaborative means everybody get back into the office. So I think we really got to watch out for this. In terms of personal actions, and then I'll wrap here, that I think everyone should take into consideration when it comes to things like DEI, inclusion, whatever it is. Honestly, one of the fundamental mindset shifts that is a theme you hear in a lot of my stuff is, we all need to accept the world would be a much worse place if everyone was like you. The world would not be better if everyone thought, acted, behaved like you. It would be exponentially worse. And believing otherwise just sets you on a stage where you're just going to make some bad decisions from there. And going back to some of the things I've said throughout this conversation, I would say, as an individual, recognize other views are not contagious. It's okay to talk to someone who does not see things the same way you do. It's okay to talk to somebody who disagrees with you. And it's okay if after talking, you still don't agree, but you at least recognize that there's value to the perspective that they bring and that they have something to say that matters on the topic, and that you can agree and value with that. And so I'd encourage people to actively seek this stuff out. If we're really going to make work or the world a more inclusive place, a place where people can belong, we got to crack that nut first. Because if we can't even talk with people or engage with people who don't think the same way we do, it's hopeless. So set up some time. Honestly, you'd be surprised. Reach out to somebody who doesn't think like you. They'll be shocked you did it. And maybe you'll get a few that say no. But I can't tell you how many times I've reached out to somebody that on paper, you would be like, you will never get along. And I go, yeah, maybe not. But I'd love to learn from them and get to know them better and see how they look at the world and what can I take from that. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Friday, wonderful weekend. I will see you on the other side.